My hospital director called me selfish for taking my first vacation in 14 years and then begged me to come back when the governor needed emergency surgery. I have been a cardiothoracic surgeon for 22 years. 14 of those were at Ridgemont General. In 14 years, I never took a vacation. Not one. I worked holidays, doubles, back-to-backs that ran so long the next morning's team was already prepping when I finally walked out. 3,000 surgeries. Lowest complication rate in the state. Patients drove 4 hours and asked for me by name. I gave that hospital its reputation. And every year, the director, Howard Fisk, made my life harder. Howard was an administrator, MBA, corner office, never held a scalpel. But he controlled schedules, budgets, and staffing. When I asked for updated monitoring equipment, he denied it and renovated the administrative wing. When I asked for a second surgical fellow to assist on complex cases, he said the budget couldn't support it. Then he hired a third secretary for his office. When I published a paper that brought national attention to the hospital, Howard held a press conference and never mentioned my name. He referred to the surgical team like the paper had written itself. When I was invited to speak at a national conference, Howard told me I couldn't go because he needed me on the schedule that week. The week had 3 minor procedures any competent surgeon could have handled. He just didn't want me getting attention outside his building. Everyone saw it. The nurses knew, the anesthesiologists knew, my team knew. Howard resented me because the institution he ran depended on someone he hadn't personally recruited. He inherited me. I was there before he was, and that bothered him in a way he never tried to hide. He approved vacations for everyone in the building except me. I'd asked him for years to hire another senior cardiothoracic surgeon. He never did. He kept the department understaffed because it saved money, then used the understaffing as the reason to deny my time off. Every year, surgical backlog, patient continuity, some new excuse cut from the same cloth. In 14 years, I missed my daughter's recitals, my son's games, 2 anniversaries, and my father's 70th. My wife stopped asking when I'd be home. She just assumed I wouldn't be. Last March, I put in for 2 weeks in June and told Howard I wasn't asking, I was informing. I had enough leave to take 2 months. I was taking 2. He approved it the next day and didn't speak to me about it for 3 months. The day before I left, he stopped me in the hall and told me he hoped I understood that if anything went wrong while I was gone, it would be on me. I told him it would be on whoever was running the hospital, which was him. I flew to the coast with my wife and kids. First real vacation in 14 years. My daughter Georgia was 12 and my son Gareth was 9, and it was the first time either had been on a plane. I turned my phone off. On day 4, my wife Julie woke me up at 6. The hospital had called the rental's landline. I called back. It was Alan, the chief of surgery. The governor, Caden, had been brought in overnight with a torn aorta after a car accident. The tear was in a location that needed a technique I had developed and published on. Nobody else on staff had performed it. Then Howard got on the line. His voice was different from every conversation I'd had with him in 14 years. He asked me to fly back. He said he'd authorize a private charter. He said the hospital needed me. I let him finish. Then I told him no. Not, let me think about it. Just no. And I told him why. I reminded him of every denied request, every blocked vacation, every time he'd taken credit for work he had nothing to do with. I told him he'd built a hospital that couldn't function without me and treated me like I was disposable. And now he was learning what disposable actually looked like. He started stammering. I hung up. My hands were steady for the first time in years. I walked out to the porch. The ocean was 200 yards away, doing what oceans do. Julie came out in her pajamas with coffee. She looked at my face, then at the phone and said, "It was the hospital." I told her everything. She didn't cheer. She didn't celebrate. She set her mug down on the railing and watched the water for a long second before she answered. She just sat down and said, "Good. Now say it again when he calls back because he will." Then, quieter. "Georgia asked me last year if you even lived with us anymore." She was serious. I couldn't say anything. My 12-year-old had asked her mother if her father still lived in their house, and Julie had carried that question for a year without telling me. We went to the beach. Georgia and Gareth built something in the sand, arguing about walls, laughing when the waves wrecked them. I watched Georgia laugh and realized something that made my chest hurt. I didn't recognize the sound. My own daughter's laugh, and it sounded unfamiliar to me. I'd heard it so few times. I'd been in operating rooms and Howard's office while she was learning how to make it. I missed the whole thing. Gareth came over with the baseball he'd packed even though Julie told him he wouldn't need it. He held it up and said, "Dad, do you want to throw?" But he didn't say it the way a 9-year-old should say it. He said it slow, careful, like he was testing the water, like he expected me to say I was busy or had a call to make. He had that look kids get when they've been told no so many times they stop expecting yes. I said, "Yeah, let's go." I didn't hesitate. We threw that ball back and forth for an hour. His arm was getting pretty good. I told him that, and he smiled so big it almost broke me. These were the moments Howard's system had stolen from me. Not with one big move, but with 14 years of small decisions that added up to me being a stranger in my own family. That evening, Alan called again. He said the team had tried a stopgap to slow the bleeding, but the tear itself was in a place none of them could reach safely. Then he said, "Howard is telling the board you refused to help. He's framing it like you abandoned the hospital." I thanked him for being honest and hung up. I stood at the counter staring at nothing. Julie watched me put the phone down and didn't even wait. She said, "What did he do now?" I told her. Her eyes got hard in the quiet way that's worse than yelling. She said, "He spent 14 years making sure you couldn't leave, and now he's punishing you for leaving. That's not your boss. That's a warden." Then her phone rang. She picked up. I watched her face change from across the room. She put it on speaker. Howard's voice came through, soft, almost gentle. He said, "Julie, I know your husband is upset with me, and I understand, but there's a man dying in my hospital, and your husband is the only person in this state who can save him. I'm asking you, as a mother, as someone who understands what family means, please talk to him." Julie said, "You have some nerve calling my phone, Howard. Don't ever contact me again." She hung up. She set the phone down like it was something dirty. I was already standing. Howard had crossed a line. Going around me to reach into my family, to use guilt on the woman who'd raised my kids alone because of his decisions. That wasn't desperation. That was who Howard actually was. He couldn't control me, so he tried to control her. The next morning, I called Alan before sunrise. I said I needed to know what was happening politically. All of it. He told me the governor's family had been camped at the hospital for 2 days. The chief of staff was calling the board every 3 hours, like clockwork. clockwork. The board was feeling the pressure and it was rolling downhill onto everyone. Then Alan said, Howard told the board he had you on standby and that you'd be back within 24 hours. That was yesterday. The board thinks you're coming. He lied to them. I let that sit for a second. Howard told them he had it handled. He told them I was on standby like I was some tool he could just pull off a shelf whenever he needed me. And it was a lie. I had told him no and hung up on him. Instead of telling the board the truth, Howard had made up a story where he was still in control. I asked Alan why. Alan's answer was immediate. Because if Howard tells the board his best surgeon refused, the next question is why. And the answer to why destroys him. 14 years of denied requests, blocked vacations, stolen credit. The board had only ever heard Howard's version, and his version was that I was difficult, talented, but demanding. The grumblings of someone who didn't understand the business side. They trusted Howard's version because Howard was the one in the room with them. I was always in the operating room, but if I didn't show up, his lie was going to collapse in real time. They'd be sitting there waiting for me, and I wouldn't come. The first question would be, why didn't he come back? The second would be, why did Howard tell us he was coming? And the third, the one Howard was really afraid of, would be, what exactly has been going on between the director and his top surgeon for the last 14 years? That's the question that would end him. Then Alan said, Sun called me this morning. Sun Peterson was the surgeon who'd trained me, retired now. After surgery, she'd joined the hospital's advisory board. She'd been watching Howard's management for years and had concerns. She just never had enough ammunition. Alan said, she told me to tell you that whatever you decide, she's paying attention, and she's not the only one. I called Sun directly. I said, if I come back, can you guarantee me what happens next actually changes things? Or does Howard survive this like he survives everything? She was quiet for a moment. Then, come back on your terms, and I'll make sure the board hears every word you have to say, not through Howard, directly. That word, directly, hung in the air. In 14 years, I'd never spoken to the board without Howard filtering it. Every report, every concern I'd raised had gone through his office first, and by the time it came out the other side, it sounded like nothing. Sun was offering me a microphone Howard couldn't mute. I went back inside. Julie was on the couch reading a book. Georgia was at the table drawing something with colored pencils, her tongue sticking out a little the way it does when she's concentrating. Gareth was curled up on the other end of the couch, still asleep, with sand in his hair from the day before. Nobody had washed it out. He'd fallen asleep on the ride home from the beach, and Julie must have just carried him to bed. I stood in that room and looked at my family. This is what 14 years of missed life looks like when you finally get a piece of it back. A wife who reads on the couch because she learned how to be alone. A daughter who draws quietly because she's used to her father not being there to talk to. A son who sleeps with sand in his hair because the day before was the first time in his life his dad spent a full day at the beach with him. I told Julie everything. She asked one question. What do you want to come out of this? I said, I want Howard to never be able to do this to another doctor again. She nodded. Then go finish it. I booked a flight for the next morning. I drove straight from the airport to the hospital in jeans and a t-shirt. The receptionist had to look twice to recognize me. The hallway toward the surgical wing was full of suits and security and clipboard people from the governor's office. Alan met me in the corridor. The first thing he said was, Howard's been telling everyone you agreed to come back last night. He announced it in a board call this morning. Howard had already gotten ahead of me. In Howard's version, he made the call. I said yes, sir, and I flew back like a good soldier. If I just walked into the OR and did the surgery, that became the truth. Alan said, if you go into that OR right now, Howard wins. He'll stand in front of cameras tomorrow and talk about leadership. I went looking for Sun. I found her in a conference room with 2 other advisory board members and staffing reports spread across the table. Vacation requests from every department. Approved, approved, approved. Then mine. Denied, denied, denied. 14 years of the same words rearranged into different sentences. Equipment requests, denied. Hiring requests for a second cardiothoracic surgeon, denied. Every single one with Howard's signature on it. He'd put his own name on every no. Sun told me the full board was meeting in 90 minutes. Howard had called the meeting himself, expecting a routine pat on the back for crisis response. She'd already requested time on the agenda for a staffing review. He doesn't know what that means yet, she said. On my way out, I almost walked into Marissa McPowell, an administrator on Howard's team. Her face lit up like I was a delivery she'd been expecting. She said, oh good, you're here. Howard will be relieved. The board was very concerned. Howard told them you initially refused. That didn't look good for you. Half sympathy, half warning. Like I should be grateful Howard was giving me a chance to fix my image. Howard had poisoned the well. If I stood up in a board meeting and started talking about denied vacations, I'd look like a disgruntled employee using a crisis to settle scores. I called Julie from a stairwell. I told her Howard was 3 steps ahead. He'd told the board I agreed. He'd told the staff I refused. If I complained now, I looked petty. If I kept my mouth shut, he took the credit. I was boxed in. Julie said, you're not boxed in. You're the only person in that building who can save a man's life. That's not a box. That's a stage. 40 minutes before the board meeting, I was back in Sun's room. She had emails I'd forwarded her queued up. 14 years of denied requests. Every line item where the surgical department's funding had gone instead. Office renovations. A catering budget for quarterly dinners that had tripled over 5 years while my OR ran on machines 8 years past replacement. She said, you'll have 10 minutes, maybe 15. Make every second count. Then Alan opened the door, pale. He said, Caden is crashing. The team stabilized him, but the window is closing. If you're going to operate, it has to happen in the next few hours. Hours. I couldn't do both. If I went to the board meeting, the surgical window closed and a man died because I chose a meeting over a patient. If I scrubbed in now, Howard owned the story forever. He'd manage the crisis, save the governor, take the credit, and next month, deny my vacation like none of this happened. Sun said, if you operate first, Howard owns this. Nothing changes. Alan said quietly. The man is 47 years old. He has kids. The room went quiet. I closed my eyes. I saw Georgia at the table with her colored pencils. I heard her voice in my head, asking if Dad still lived with us. I saw Gareth bracing for a no that had become his normal. I thought about a 47-year-old man with kids sitting in chairs down the hall, feeling exactly what my kids felt every night I didn't come home. Those kids didn't know about Howard Fisk. They just wanted their dad. I opened my eyes. I said, I'm going to to operate, but I need you to delay that board meeting 3 hours. Tell them anything. When I come out of the OR, I walk straight into that boardroom, and I speak. Sun didn't argue. I'll hold them. I changed into scrubs. The fabric felt like muscle memory. My hands moved automatically, tying the drawstring, pulling on the cap, reaching for the shoe covers. I'd done this 10,000 times. My body knew the rhythm even when my mind was somewhere else. On the way to the OR, I passed Howard's office. The door was open. He was on the phone, leaning back, smiling the way a man smiles when he thinks he's won. I heard him say, "Yes, he's here. I personally arranged his return. The surgery will proceed within the hour. Personally arranged his return." I stopped in the doorway. Howard's eyes drifted to the door and saw me. The smile didn't just fade, it froze. His mouth was still in the shape of it, but his eyes had gone wide. He lowered the phone half an inch from his ear. Neither of us moved. I said, "I'm going to save that man's life, Howard. And when I'm done, you and I are going to have a very different conversation." Howard opened his mouth. His lips moved like he was starting a word. Maybe a thank you, maybe an excuse, maybe some new spin. I didn't wait to hear it. I turned and walked toward the OR. The surgery took 6 hours. The tear was worse than Alan had described, and I had to adapt my technique twice mid-procedure to reach it safely. The first adaptation was a different cannulation approach because the original site was too compromised by the trauma. The second was a graft alignment I'd only attempted twice in my career, and never on a tear sitting where his was. At one point, maybe 3 hours in, the entire team went silent because we all understood we were one wrong millimeter from losing him. One slip from watching a governor die on the table and turning this hospital into a national news story for all the wrong reasons. The only sound for a long stretch was the monitor and the suction. The anesthesiologist had stopped giving updates and was just watching my hands. The scrub nurse passed instruments before I asked for them. Nobody in that room was thinking about anything except the next millimeter. We didn't lose him. I closed the final layer of tissue and the room exhaled. I stood there for a moment with my hands still gloved, blood on my gown, and I thought about Howard upstairs, probably already drafting his statement. He probably had talking points ready about leadership and crisis management and institutional excellence. He thought the surgery was the end of this. He didn't know Sun had held the board. I stripped my gloves, untied my gown, and walked upstairs, still in my scrubs. There was a faint stain near the left sleeve. I didn't care. The boardroom was full. Sun at the long table, 2 advisory board members beside her with folders open, a wall screen with 3 main board members on video, Marissa in the corner with a notebook, Howard at the head of the table. He saw me walk in and his face did something I'd never seen it do. The smile flickered. He stood up and started, "Excellent news. The surgery was a success. I want to thank—" Sun cut him off without raising her voice. "Howard, sit down. Dr. Lombardi has been given time on the agenda to address staffing concerns." Howard's jaw tightened. He said, "This isn't the appropriate time. We're in the middle of a crisis response." A board member on the screen leaned forward. "The crisis is resolved. The governor is stable. We'd like to hear from the surgeon." Howard sat. His legs took him there. I walked to the front of the room and started talking the way I operate. Precise, steady, just facts. I told them I had submitted a formal vacation request every year for 14 years and been denied every time. I held up my phone and showed the emails. 2010, denied. 2011, denied. I told them I had requested updated surgical equipment and been denied while administrative budgets expanded. I showed them the records. Then I told them the part that mattered. I had asked, in writing, multiple times, for a second senior cardiothoracic surgeon, so the hospital would never be in a position where one person's absence could put a patient at risk. I showed them the hiring requests. Every single one had been denied. Every single one had Howard's signature on the denial. The room was quiet. Howard waited until I paused and then spoke, tight and controlled. "These are operational decisions made in the best interest of the hospital. Dr. Lombardi has always been a valued member of our team, but staffing and budgeting are complex matters." I cut him off. I didn't yell. I said 4 words. "You called my wife." Nobody moved. The board member who'd told Howard to sit down had her hand frozen halfway to her coffee cup. I said, "When I told you no, you didn't accept it. You called my wife's personal phone and tried to guilt her into making me come back. You told her you were asking as someone who understands what family means. You said that to the woman who raised my children alone for 14 years because you wouldn't let me go home." Howard's mouth opened. No sound. The board member on the video call looked directly into her camera and said, "Is this true? Did you contact Dr. Lombardi's wife?" Howard adjusted his tie. "I was trying every avenue to ensure the governor received care. The situation was urgent. Did you or did you not tell this board yesterday that Dr. Lombardi had agreed to return voluntarily?" Howard didn't answer. That's when Alan spoke from the back of the room. He'd been standing near the door the whole time. I'd almost forgotten he was there because he was so still. His voice came out calm and clear and steady. "He did. I was on the call. He told the board Dr. Lombardi was already on his way." That wasn't true. Dr. Lombardi had refused and hadn't been contacted again at that point. Howard turned and looked at Alan. The look on his face wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was betrayal. Like Alan had broken some unspoken rule by telling the truth. Alan didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He just stood there with his hands at his sides and let the silence do the work. I delivered my final statement. I came back because a man was dying. Not because Howard asked. Not because this hospital earned my loyalty. I came back because I took an oath. But I want this board to understand something. This hospital had one cardiothoracic surgeon capable of performing the procedure that just saved the governor's life. One. And that's not because qualified surgeons don't exist. It's because Howard Fisk refused to hire them for 14 years so he could keep his budget numbers clean and hold my schedule hostage. You don't run a hospital by grinding your best people into the ground and then acting shocked when the ground gives way. I paused. I'll leave my future at this hospital in your hands, but I want my terms in writing before I set foot in another operating room. A second senior cardiothoracic surgeon hired within 6 months. My accrued leave honored without interference. And a director who understands that the people who save lives in this building deserve at least as much respect as the people who manage the parking lot. Howard wasn't looking at anyone. His hands were flat on the table, but they weren't steady. There was a small tremor in his fingers. I'd spent 22 years reading bodies in operating rooms, noticing the smallest signs of something giving way. Howard was giving way. I turned for the door. As it swung open, I heard Sun's voice behind me. me, clear and unhurried. I'd like to formally request a leadership review of the director's office, effective immediately. I called Julie. I could hear the ocean. Somewhere behind her, Georgia was calling Gareth's name across the wind, neither of them knowing I was listening.